That's driving me mental. You're one of those maniacs who puts your lens cap on upside down. That is wrong, sir.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that was a thing.
It's cardinal sin in this studio, mate.
I also put lens hoods on the wrong way round as well. You know, when you reverse them.
I never put lens hoods on at all.
Well, there you go.
That's an episode for another day.
There you go.
Hello and welcome to Bokehface, the Digital Camera World podcast. My name is James Arteis, the editor-in-chief of digitalcameraworld.com, and joining me this week is my colleague Mike Harris.
Hello, James.
Mike is the how-to editor
of
digitalcameraworld.com, and Mike's going to be telling us how to do a whole slew of things this week, as we have a lot of fun stuff coming up. First of all, in our In Focus segment, we're going to look at cameras a bit like these and answer the question, is medium format really the quantum leap we're told it is? Then in our Gear Up section, we're looking at something very new, very, very divisive, I think it's probably fair to say.
Yeah.
An AI camera, which I think might set the cat amongst the pigeons, but we both got opinions on that. And in our troubleshooting section, we're going to look at, or maybe you're going to show us, the ins and outs of setting up some custom functionality on your camera buttons.
I am indeed.
Good man, Mike. So if you've got any requests, any feedback, any comments, if you like Mike's shirt or my hoodie, leave us a comment down below, send us an email. All this stuff is in the show notes to the side or below. And so without further ado, Mike, let's get in focus. Okay, on our In Focus section this week, there's this assumed wisdom, Mike, and we can talk about whether or not we agree with this, that medium format, maybe particularly mirrorless medium format, is like the pinnacle of imaging quality. And we obviously have a couple of really respected brands. We've got Hasselblad, well represented here, Fujifilm with the GFX system. Yes. And I think for a lot of folks, it's an aspirational thing, right? I want to get a medium format camera. So I guess just as a crude thing, are you somebody who buys into that as like a hypothesis?
No, I'm not. That's not because I have anything against medium format. I think medium format photography looks incredible, and I do think there's a difference, but I don't think you need to see it as something that you should aspire to.
Right.
Plenty of photographers have made wonderful careers, not just careers, have produced wonderful photos, created wonderful bodies of work without ever touching a medium format camera. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it should be seen as this kind of place that we all need to get to, this level, if you will, to achieve. But from a creative standpoint, if that's where you want to go, then all the power to you, because it's a fantastic system.
I suppose the assumption that medium format is the tippy top comes with the presupposition that anything below that is somehow inferior or a step down, which I think is interesting because there is this kind of this inbuilt wisdom that like a APS-C is down here, full frame is like there's a hierarchy. But as you say, you should look for the tool that's appropriate for what you want to do, not find the tool and then make your work conform to it, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think, and I'm guilty of this, I think a lot of people are, it's the same kind of conversation with full frame and APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. So I was actually watching a YouTube video this week because I'm thinking of buying a new camera. I've got a Z8, it's on the table here, and it's big and heavy, and I love it, but I don't take it out and about because it's just not that kind of camera. And I'm having a real hard time choosing a camera because I see cameras that I like and then I'm like, oh yeah, but they're not full frame.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And anyway, I come across this video by Cam Mackey, which is a really good YouTuber. Definitely check him out. And he was talking about, well, the video was why the Fujifilm X106 is overhyped, basically. He was a X106 user, and essentially he was selling it.
Right.
And he said, I quote, "Oh, full frame versus crop sensor, it doesn't matter," is what some people say. And he said, and I agree, in some forms it doesn't matter, but those same people will also say, oh, medium format's superior to full frame. It's like, well, that argument doesn't hold up. You just said full frame to crop doesn't matter. So he's essentially saying if medium format does matter, and a lot of people will say that it does, then surely the difference between crop sensor cameras and full frame cameras matter. So I don't think you can talk about the medium format situation without at least acknowledging the other formats and the differences that they have. But I think what we've got to get used to, and he makes this point in this video, is that they're different looks. Mm-hmm. They're not inferior or superior. They are just different looks.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing because we have choice.
It is, and it's something that Chris and I often say when we're sat in these chairs, which is that, you know, the days of having one system now or one camera, for most of us, that's old logic. You kind of tend to run maybe two systems side by side, or you have a different tool for, you know, the reason the X100 series exists is because it's like a companion camera, right? That can't possibly replace everything you do. It's intended for one job, street and reportage kind of photography.
Yes.
No more than, you know, like a Hasselblad with a 90mm lens can replace that as a street camera. They're just meant for different things. And it's okay to have different tools for different jobs.
Yeah. However, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, but obviously Fujifilm has tried to have its cake and eat it, or allow people to have their cake and eat it, with the GFX 100 RF.
That's true, yeah, and I think I actually kind of enjoy that as a proposition because for most people, the need, as we'll come on to, one of the properties of a medium format sensor is that it has a lot of resolution. Bigger photo sites, more pixels on a larger sensor. But we don't always need all of that area that we capture. And so to have that, rather than just giving you huge files that you need to crop down, having it that you can actually make an artificial change of focal length, I actually think is quite clever. It's a clever use of the tech that doesn't just impose on you these massive 100 megapixel files. So I like that as a proposition, but you're right, Fujifilm, maybe a lot of Fuji users are similar to the situation you've just alluded, which is like APS-C in full frame, there's no difference. Oh, but our medium format, big brother, that's the daddy. That's the one to go for. So yeah. I think maybe Fujifilm is complicit in this attitude. Rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, and I guess if you're a Fujifilm user, then you don't have the option for full frame. So maybe the GFX does seem more of an aspiring camera to one day own.
Do you think it's fair to say, this isn't about medium format, just in Fujifilm, that Fujifilm is kind of responsible for making APS-C acceptable, pro? Like, because I think before there was a stigma about APS-C that it's what you do until you get a big boy camera. But I think when Fujifilm came along with all of its X series and sort of the X100 range, it kind of legitimized APS-C as a format.
Yeah, I actually think Instagram is what's legitimized APS-C and indeed Micro Four Thirds. Is that there are just so many photographers out there creating just beautiful, beautiful bodies of work, and they're Fujifilm photographers or Olympus photographers or M System photographers, particularly though because it's just so popular, Fujifilm. And you're looking through their work, a lot of them are travel photographers, and you just think like, yeah, they've got an X106 or they've got an XE5 or an XE4. You just think to yourself, wow. Like, yeah, that's all you need. So I think a huge shout out to them. I think that Fujifilm has provided them with the tool and they've ran with it.
Definitely. And I think as an adjunct to that, I think a lot of people assume that Fujifilm is also responsible because GFX is so popular and so widespread that Fujifilm brought medium format to the masses, when in fact it was actually Hasselblad that preceded GFX, making the first ever mirrorless medium format system. I'm going to read out a couple of specs to illustrate for those who think, okay, because we've kind of downplayed it a bit, like what's the need for medium format? There are some definite upsides. The main thing being, if we take the Hasselblad system, which uses the same sensor as the GFX 100 series, but their pipelines are different. I'm just going to take this because we've got it in front of us. So a Hasselblad sensor and the Hasselblad Color Science, it captures 281 trillion colors. That is 281,000 billion. That's a lot of colors. It captures them in 16-bit color depth, and that's giving you absolute color fidelity, particularly when it comes to things like skin tones, which historically, if you think back to things like Shirley cards, cameras have not always been very democratic with their rendering of like non-white skin tones. So the fact that you have sensors now that can capture all that tonality and all the different kinds of, ethnicities. That's a big thing. The larger image sensors, now full frame and even some crop sensor cameras do make this claim as well. But with these guys, you're getting 15 stops of dynamic range. I think that's a true 15 stops of dynamic range. You don't have to do any sort of interpretation of fiddling the numbers. 15 stops of dynamic range. And also with the Hasselblad X2D2, sounds a bit like R2D2, that, doesn't it? The X2D2, it actually extends the color gamut to P3, which gives you like 26% more of the visible spectrum than sRGB. So if you are all about authenticity, absolute color fidelity, that's the sort of thing where medium format sensors are really coming into their own. We were talking earlier about things like astrophotography and low light photography. Again, you get that dynamic range, bigger sensor, bigger photo sites. So for pure imaging performance, that's where they come into their own. But if you think about medium format cameras of the past, like medium format film cameras, they were done almost in a lot of senses to sort of give you more surface area to work with. And then you would crop down for things like magazine covers or magazine double page spreads. So again, just because you have all this area and this resolution, it's not implicit that you actually need it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing to remember is that systems, that there are trade-offs. So if medium format was cheaper, if you could have smaller medium format bodies, and if you could have faster medium format cameras, as in the, shooting with them was basically faster, camera shake wasn't such a big problem, then I think most people that shoot crop sensor cameras or full frame cameras would probably turn around and say, well, yeah, all right. If it's the same camera, okay, I'll shoot that. And then as you step down, it's the same with full frame. Full frame is... I think full frame is talked about so much because it's the happy medium. But you step down to APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, you've got smaller cameras. I mean, look at the XE5. It's an interchangeable lens camera. It's absolutely tiny.
That big, yeah.
It's got that, is it 28 or 23 mil lens?
Oh, the pancake sort of.
Yeah, it's great. And, it's not overly expensive. It's a pricey camera, but it's still, you're looking at about £1,200, which in today's money is not a lot for a camera. You're getting huge amounts of usability with it. It creates it. Oh, I'm getting tripped up here. It takes wonderful images. You've got great specs. High resolution photos, Fujifilm film simulations. It looks good. That's why people are going for those cameras.
Yeah.
So medium format is definitely, I don't want to say an acquired taste, but I think it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. I will point out one more thing before we wrap things up, because I think there is, if we think about that hierarchical thinking, APS-C is all right, full frame's best, medium format's better. And I think a lot of people don't realize that mirrorless medium format, so GFX and Hasselblad, is not true medium format. So I'm going to have to look at my notes because I don't know these off the top of my head. But so a mirrorless medium format sensor is pretty big. So that is a gigantic image sensor, bigger than full frame, right? But this is actually cropped medium format. So that sensor is only 45 by 30 mil, which sort of fits between 35 mil and traditional medium format. But a proper medium format sensor is 53.4 by 40 mil, which is significantly bigger. That's the phase one cameras of this world that cost like 50 odd grand. So even then, somebody might think, I'm buying mirrorless medium format. I've got the ultimate weapon. And actually it turns out, well, you've got that weapon, but there is a better one still. Then you go beyond that and you obviously get plate photography and 8x10 and stuff. So it's a never ending cycle going to large format, extra large format. I think ultimately, as I think we're kind of alluding here, chasing specs and tech is all well and good, but it has to be right for what you need it for.
Yeah. And there is a way that you can game the system and capture medium format looking images with a smaller sensor, which is called the Brennheiser effect.
Go on, explain that for us, Mike.
So basically, you select a lens, like a fast lens, so say like a 50mm 1.8 or something, or even something like a 200 2.8. And you get your subject. They must be still, but you shoot to f2.8. So you get a nice blurry background, nice shallow depth of field, and you essentially create a panorama or a stitched image. So you basically photograph around the subject. You focus on them, you lock your focus so it doesn't change, and then you kind of imagine, I don't know, like a 3x3 grid or something, and you take each of those shots, shot, and then if it's all gone well, you kind of in your mind overlap the images a bit, you shove it into your processing software, and then the processing software binds the images together, and you get this kind of medium format effect. And it was popularized by a chap called Mr. Brennheiser. I'm not sure of his first name.
Mr. is good enough.
Mr.'s good enough, and hence why it's called that. Yeah.
And just for those who don't know, because we didn't touch on it, so one of the other properties of a medium format sensor, because a sensor is physically so much larger, the same way that a crop sensor has greater depth of field, a medium format larger sensor has a shallower depth of field. So if you take, a portrait on a medium format camera, all other variables being equal, you will have a much shallower depth of field, much blurrier background. It will have more of that look. Again, it's a look, it's an aesthetic. And if that's right for what you want, medium format's for you.
Yeah.
And if it's not, maybe it's not for you. But I think the ultimate thing is it's not the be-all and end-all.
Ryan Brennheiser.
Good man, Ryan Brennheiser. Shout out to our boy.
Nice one, Ryan.
Ryan Brennheiser. Okay, so we've probably saved some people a lot of money. Cost other people a bit more money, perhaps. If they're like, oh, yeah, shallow depth of field, I'll have that. Bit of 15 stop dynamic range. Some people will be all about that.
I just want to say, I'd love a medium format camera.
You run fast enough, you can have one of these.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, I can't, it's too heavy, but they're expensive. But a lot of people, what they're doing is buying medium format film cameras or older digital medium format cameras to save money. So that is a route.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And as with all tech, you don't have to buy the latest generation. You can go to MPB or KEH or, another camera dealer, buy a few years old model that still works perfectly well and just, get to grips with that.
Medium format film's well expensive, actually, but still.
Well, some people like that sort of thing. From the world of physical medium format sensors and film, to something a little bit more next gen and maybe a bit scary as we dive into the world of AI in our Gear Up segment. On Gear Up this week, we have a camera that has generated a lot of conversation, I think is fair to say, Mike, and everyone's going to have their opinion on this. And I came into this camera with one perspective, and I think I left my discussions with the creators of this camera with a slightly different impression and a more favourable impression. I think it's an important conversation to have. So this is the Caira. So this is an AI camera. It's not a standalone camera. It does require a phone with which to work. As we can see here, it has a micro four thirds mount. So I'm going to assemble this camera before your very eyes. So it works with the entirety, it works with a lot of micro four thirds lenses. There are going to be some that need to be firmwared in. But so there we have the Caira with a lens. And to complete the setup, you need to pair it with an iPhone. Now, why might you need to pair a camera with a phone, Mike? The reason is because it uses, or it employs, it's not the be all and it employs AI. So if you heard, as you may well have done, that there was an AI camera, what was your first instinct? What's your first reaction to that, Mike, as a proposition?
Well, sensible Mike would say that AI is in an awful lot of cameras. AI algorithms and autofocus, computational photography.
Yes.
Is nothing new.
Right.
So I think I would say, what kind of AI?
So here's the thing. Here's the bit that throws the cat amongst the pigeons. So the Caira, used in and of itself, it is simply a micro four thirds camera that captures and sends the pictures to your phone.
Yep.
And from there, in fact, we've talked before about crappy phone apps that the brands make. So in one sense, this just gets around that and enables you to just beam your pictures to wherever you want to straight away. The bit that causes or has caused a bit of consternation is the fact it uses Nano Banana. Or it can do if you are so inclined. It's not an inherent property. of what it does, but it is the sort of the singing, dancing selling point. And I think there's been a little bit of a disconnect here because, and the tech has changed. So initially, when the camera was sort of first put out there, it's still on sort of, we're playing with a prototype here, so it's still sort of under testing and sort of closed, the closed community. Initially, it had the ability to add prompts. So you could, as you take a picture, you could put in a prompt as you would in any Gen AI piece of software and say, you know, turn all the people into cartoon characters, or, you know, turn the sky into candy floss, or anything more sinister than that. I think, which is a lot of people's fear about AI being a little bit controversial. Caira, the people behind Caira have removed that prompt functionality because they identified very quickly that actually it's going to be abused. So they've taken that part out of the equation.
Well, that's good.
So I think a lot of people's first reaction of like, okay, people are going to abuse it. It's Gen AI. It's not real photography. I think a lot of that has maybe subsided.
Yeah.
Where the AI comes in a practical sense is, let's say you and I are sat here. Let's say we're sat at the seaside, right? We're sat at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Americans won't know what that is. It's an old seaside town, essentially. And you're sat there in your deck chair. And I think, oh, picture of that, picture of Mike. Brilliant, Blackpool Pleasure Beach. And then I can make the camera turn that into like a retro themed image, like a 1950s old-fashioned British seaside. So again, that's employing Gen AI, but in a way that I think is sympathetic to what we're taking a picture of. We're not, you know, going and transforming and making things that weren't there necessarily. We're adding a kind of a glorified filter, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. So I wrote a news story on this camera when quite a little while ago now, and that was when it was still using Nano Banana to just generate randomness. Everything. Yeah. And I didn't like that. It also seemed like, which I guess is what the company is have come to this conclusion themselves, in that it was a bit of a oxymoron to begin with, because you taking, you know, good quality micro four thirds lenses, giving them a housing so you can use them, and then including technology that basically flagrantly goes against the art of photography.
Right.
So I think that's a really good decision that they've removed that, and I think it's really positive that they've identified that as a problem as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from, and I think you can kind of do a lot of this stuff in post and no one cares about that. So one of the things, I don't know if you can still do this, but one of the things, I think I watched a Tony Northrup video showcasing the camera. And for example, it removed people from a scene and then it made the water a long exposure.
Right.
And I think then that becomes personal to the photographer, in the sense of, I would never blur water if I haven't used an ND grad.
You haven't gone through those steps to achieve it.
I would never replace a sky. I couldn't live with myself if I replaced a sky, because I wouldn't feel that that's not the type of photography that I do. If I was a photographer, for a real estate photographer, I would replace a sky and not think twice about it, because that's just what they do. And if I was a hobbyist who just started taking landscape photos and, I don't know, is extremely busy and can't wait up till sunset or something, and it's for their personal collection or their Flickr or whatever, then yeah, maybe I'd replace the sky. But what I would do is remove people from a shot. Quite often what I do is I'll set up on a tripod and I'll take multiple images so that people move around, and then I can easily clone them out. Yeah. It's still a technique. It's kind of in camera-y in a way. So yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm not. It's not such a problem for me taking things away. It's adding things in. Right. That I think is my line in the sand for photography. So that means blurring things, adding in different skies and all this kind of stuff. Unless, of course, I was creating a composite. There's some great surrealist photographers out there that produce composites that I absolutely adore. But that's a very specific, goal in mind. Yeah. So I think what's interesting is, I think this, because in a previous life, the same company behind Caira also created Alice camera, which was a very similar chassis. And the idea then was,
you're familiar now with these phones, right? The Chinese phones that have the bolt-on lenses. So you've got a Chinese camera phone and it's got like a long telephoto lens.
Yeah.
So the idea being like, your smartphone's great, but the quality's not quite there. If only it could take proper lenses.
Yep.
And then they take that to the next level. Okay, your smartphone's great if only it had a bigger sensor. And I think that was the germ of the idea. Like, okay, let's put a micro four thirds sensor that attaches to your phone so your phone can take great images.
Yeah.
And then it kind of developed from there. What's interesting about Caira, distinct from Alice camera before it, is that this isn't really aimed at you and me.
No.
It's not aimed at photographers. It's aimed at, I'm just assuming your dad is the sort of person. It's aimed at your dad or my sister or whoever. Somebody who goes to the Eiffel Tower and there's all these blooming people in the picture and they don't have the knowledge or the skill or the wherewithal to know how to get rid of people. So you can take your photograph of the Eiffel Tower and it accepts voice commands, which I'll come on to in a second. And you can say, please remove blah, blah, blah. Or, go through the crowd removal tool. And for that person who doesn't have the photographic acumen, they can achieve the picture that they wanted when they've gone to that place, which I think is, as you say, for you and me who are practicing photographers, we would find that in some way dubious because we didn't achieve it practically.
Yeah.
But for that person who just wants a nice picture, they've gone there, or they've gone and the weather's not quite right. Think, oh, I'm on my dream holiday and it's a cloudy day. The one day I brought my camera, it's a cloudy day. Oh, I wish it was, because in my memory I've been on this holiday and it's sunny and warm. I'd love it to be warm. So in that sense, for that kind of person, so not for the core photographer, for an iPhone user essentially, I don't personally have an issue with that. I think that's actually fair, but I don't know what your take on that might be.
Yeah, I think it's fair. My dad's got a Nikon D3500.
Oh, we've talked about him before, haven't
Yeah.
we? You changed his settings.
I did, yeah. But he doesn't have any editing software, so
Right.
maybe that would be something that he would enjoy.
Yeah.
And if he's watching this, get some editing software, man. I'll teach you.
But how about, right, so to take the crowd room, which is, the camera does so much more. Let me just, before I forget, because my memory's terrible, on the subject of the voice recognition. So if you're somebody, again, you're an iPhone user, you've got this bit of kit, so you've got the power of a nice camera lens, but you still don't understand the exposure triangle, or you don't understand knobs and dials.
Yes.
So again, this doesn't have knobs and dials. It's voice command and it's touchscreen. It's kind of the dream that certainly me and Chris, now maybe you're in this boat, maybe not, always say, like, you look at a typical camera menu and it's clunky and it's clearly been designed in 1990, and you say, why don't cameras have menus like Android phones or Apple phones where you can just tap and swipe and things?
Okay, so this is interesting because my first thought with this camera and why I kind of dismissed it is that I'm kind of like, okay, so your phone sensor's not big enough, so there's a sensor. Your phone doesn't have a nice micro four thirds lens, so there's a micro four thirds lens. We already have a solution to that. It's called a camera.
It's a standalone camera.
But that's a really good reason why this is interesting, because it takes the functionality of the phone and applies that to kit that allows you to create more of perhaps what's in your mind's eye. So that's actually changed my mind slightly on this camera. And you are right, there is no camera that I can think of, even if you take an entry-level camera like the Canon RF100, which is really geared towards beginners, it's not as simple to use as a phone.
I think using this, I'm not going to say this is the best way to learn, but to give an example. So if you ask someone to change the aperture value on a camera, and they'll turn the dial left and right, and they may or may not see the effect it's having. But on their aperture can be a slider. And obviously you pull the slider down, things get blurrier. You turn the slider up, things get more crispy.
Yeah.
The voice commands also enable you, again, if you don't have the acumen to know how to do this, you're taking a photograph and you can say, make the picture more contrasty. Or you can say, please, make the skin tones more natural or whatever it might be. So again, to me, it's to empower those who would like to take good images and they don't have the time, money or inclination. So in that context, I genuinely don't have a problem with the camera, but I think a lot of the initial, and I can feel your concern as well, is when it impinges on pure photography. Which I sympathise with, and I do kind of think there is merit to that thought process.
Yeah, obviously I'd have to try it out and see more of it, but to my mind, I'm just glad that they've removed the sort of unbridled Gen AI access that it had before. And that, to me, changes the game completely. I also like the fact that this could potentially be something that's a gateway to photography for people.
Yeah.
And the fact that it uses a Micro Four Thirds system, they could have, not necessarily easily, but they could have gone down the route of proprietary lenses.
Yes.
The fact that this uses a Micro Four Thirds system gives you the option, if you buy a few lenses for it, actually get on with it really well, and you say, you know what, I'm really into this photography business, I'm going to go out and buy myself a camera. You have the option to go out and buy a Panasonic or an OM system camera and right away have the lenses to start using it. So I think there's merit here. I think AI has become so scary, and people like me are partially responsible for that.
So I think what you're saying is that the AI itself isn't evil, inherently evil. It's what you do or don't do with that AI.
Generative artificial intelligence is the problem. It's not, or my problem, it's not AI.
Right.
AI is useful. I've said it before. AI has been around since the 1950s. There's kind of a hysteria about AI, but that's not the problem. It's Gen AI and what that is used for. And I think the changes they have made to this camera, providing I get to have a go with it and you know, enjoy the experience, I think has changed this in my eyes. So I'm much more receptive to Caira than I was a few months ago.
Yeah, and I think again, it's just that context, because I likened this in a bit of a bleaker way than you might be comfortable with. But I think, you know, if you're saying you can take a photograph and use Gen AI to pervert it, whether you mean that in a perverse sense or just, you know, you're just contorting it in a way that's not real, there might be an ethical issue there. But any camera can be used to take upskirts on the subway. That doesn't mean all cameras are evil. It's your intent, what you're doing with that camera. And I think if you're somebody who just wants to take nice pictures and you don't know how, you're an iPhone user, you want something that enables you to do that, I just think that's a very different proposition. It's AI as a useful tool, not a tool of abuse, I guess. So AI has a lot of properties that actually can benefit us in day-to-day life. We're so snowballed with all of the nastiness and the rubbish AI that we forget that at some point AI could actually be, T1000s aside, a really beneficial tool, if only it were used for the right purpose. And I kind of think the reception being whatever it is, I think, wow, if I was somebody who didn't know how to take a nice picture and I said, oh, please give me a blurry background and make the subject look like it's lit properly, it might be pretty nice. Yeah,
so I also think a lot of the fear around AI is the future. So it's not necessarily the now, because there's nothing in that camera that makes me think it's going to hoodwink anybody into believing that it was a professional photograph that shows the moment exactly as it was and is completely real.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the fear comes from where will this be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years' time? And it's business decisions like Caira have made to remove the Gen AI elements, to restrict them, that I think is going to be for the better in the long run. And I hope we see more of that in the future, more kind of actual thought to the usage and how it affects the medium and the end user. So
definitely, and I think a shout out to Caira for that, because it does solicit and receive feedback from the community. How do we feel about this? What kind of effects would you like to see? Obviously made the decision to get rid of the prompts. So given a lot of the reckless AI companies that we're seeing in the news so much, it's nice to have a company that's actually oh, right, let's listen to what people are saying and maybe dial that down a bit or be more communicative with our audience. And like you say, hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time, when these maybe become a bit more widespread, the industry will be in a bit more of a sensible place. Well, on that bombshell, Mike and I have had a good old confusing chinwag about that from AI and what it is and isn't good for. Mike's going to tell you about physical, practical, put your fingers on buttons and what that is or isn't good for in our troubleshooting section. In troubleshooting this week, another kind reader of the show. This was an email, actually. A lot of our stuff is YouTube comments, but we had an email, believe it or not, sent in. The long and short of it is, you'd mentioned on a previous episode about using custom function buttons to achieve certain shortcuts and things. And the question is really like, can you give us some pointers or some tips on how custom buttons and custom functions are used on a camera? What might be a sensible thing? Doesn't have to be brand specific at all, but yeah. Custom, because I think custom buttons and custom functions are kind of a secret weapon for your camera. So it's something you've got a bit more experience with than me shooting in the field. So tell us all about custom buttons, Mike.
Brilliant. The exciting subject of custom buttons.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's one of those things that seems kind of dry and dreary, but really it enables you. There's so much power locked in these black boxes that you've got to dive into so many menus to unlock it. But if you know what you want at your fingertips, you can just unlock that power so much more easily. Yeah,
so custom buttons are your chance, basically, to make wielding your camera easier and to get those difficult to access settings and features to bring them to the fore, really. Obviously, cameras nowadays do so much that you couldn't possibly come up with a control scheme that kind of works for everyone. So especially if you do more niche forms of photography or you have a particular way of shooting, custom buttons are just going to make your life so much easier. So this is my camera here.
Pride and joy.
My Nikon Z8, and I'll just quickly run over what I said in a previous podcast, just so we're up to speed here. So
Sorry, that's driving me mental. You're one of those maniacs who puts your lens cap on upside down. That is wrong, sir.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that was a thing.
It's cardinal sin in this studio, mate.
I also put lens hoods on the wrong way round as well. You know, when you reverse them.
I never put lens hoods on at all.
Well, there you go.
That's an episode for another day.
There you go. We've got two FN buttons at the front of this camera. And
FN for function.
Function, yes.
Yep.
But you can pretty much customize most of the buttons on Nikon cameras. And one of the reasons I really like Nikon cameras is because they do have a lot of buttons, because I'm somebody that just prefers a sort of physical, tactile control scheme. So I have my thumb stick, clicking it, centers the focus point.
So when you move it around the screen, you click that and it goes back to the middle,
Yep.
I guess? Yeah.
My record button is to turn the live view display on or off. So I'm actually going to look at this to make sure I don't make myself look like a fool. So yeah, it just turns everything off apart from the focus point.
Right.
So it
gets rid of like clutter.
Yeah, it gets rid of your histogram, your exposure information, your battery life, the whole shebang. It just goes away. And I find, especially when I'm shooting something like landscapes, or even sometimes when I'm doing street photography, it kind of harkens back to the old sort of film days when you were looking through an optical film viewfinder, and there's really not that much clutter.
Yeah.
And it lets the composition breathe. You can kind of see what's going on. So I like to do that. And then F1 is AF area mode, single point AF. So if I hold it down, it goes back to single point autofocus. Now, FN2 is to cycle the AF area mode. So what this means is, say I'm photographing some wildlife, I can cycle to auto area AF with, say, animal detection on. So my focus point is going to track the animal that's coming towards me and find its eye. But if there's like a blade or grass in the foreground that's kind of blowing in the wind, and that catches my my focus system,
yeah,
and it starts to then focus on the foreground, it can actually be really hard, nigh on impossible sometimes, for autofocus to find that animal again.
Just gets lost, doesn't it? Literally.
It just gets lost.
Yeah.
So what I can do is I can quickly hit the FN1 button, and I'm back to single point. I can lock focus again on my animal anywhere, and then I let go. I just release it, and it goes back to auto area AF and continues tracking.
Right.
So that's super useful. Now that is but one example of how you can hit the microphone stand. That is but one example of how you can use custom settings on your camera to really good effect.
I was a friend of mine. I don't set up custom on a lot of my stuff. The cameras that I shoot with for jobs basically always have custom stuff set up. So I had one of my cameras out, and one of my friends said to me like, "Oh, why do you program your buttons? Like, why do you bother?" And I said, "Do you ever use like Photoshop or even like a word processor?" And they said, "Yeah." Did you ever press Command C, Command V? You know, copy and paste essentially. And they, yeah. I said, it's that for your camera.
Yeah.
It is a shortcut to just give you fingertip control of common functionalities, whether that is fiddling with your autofocus or changing your exposure or whatever. And I found that to be the best shortcut to explain to people why you do all this, because there are some things that you always need. Oh, how do I do that? Oh, I know the shortcut in Photoshop. How do you do it in the drop-down menus? Like, it's the same, isn't it? Like, doing things with the drop-down menus in Photoshop takes so much longer than just knowing the shortcut on the keyboard. And it's the same. Why would you go into your camera menu and dither around and try and find the right settings when you can just assign it to a button?
Yeah. And camera menus, as we're about to get onto, can be quite complicated and convoluted.
What's your favourite camera menu?
Nikon. Yeah. I know I'm really biased to Nikon, and I am, because the end photo of the Nikon magazine gave me a job once. And
we're all paying for it ever since.
But it's genuinely a thing with Nikon cameras. You actually see it on the internet quite a lot. You see it quite a lot on Reddit. They are known for having a simple menu system. It's not foolproof, it's not perfect, but the way it's ordered is basically just a list. It says what it is on the tin, and you navigate your list quite easily. I
think to that point, you didn't, you simply found the system that really works for you, because you could just as easily have moved on to another system. But actually, like you say, the Nikon menus, the grammar of the Nikon interface is actually quite logical, unlike some other brands. So I just come to your defense there and say, actually, you found what works for you and you're sticking with it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the thing with Nikon was, I remember the first time I picked up a D800, and for the first time in my life, I held a camera where I felt like, oh, this is like really easy for me to shoot in manual mode. Right. And I was very much learning at that time. And I suddenly felt like I had at my disposal a camera that I could control. And like most brands, Nikon hasn't really changed its control schemes much over the years, particularly when they released the Z8. The Z8 harkens back to the DSLRs very, very much so. So something else that you can make use of, which kind of is within this realm, are memory banked settings. So one of the few things I don't like about the Z8 is the kind of enthusiast level Nikon cameras, the Z6 III and the Z5. They have on their shooting dial U numbers. I think it's U123.
Gotcha.
And basically you can set up your camera and you can assign it to one of those U functions, and then when you're out shooting, you can just turn to the U function that you want, and your camera's set up for landscapes, astro, sports, wildlife, portraits, whatever you generally shoot, which is fantastic. The Z8 does have this function, but you have to go, it doesn't have a physical button for it.
Gotcha.
You have to go into the menu system, and where it differs on the Z8, and there's fors and against for this, but if you bank a setting on the Z8, it continuously saves. So if you have setting, I can't remember if they're done A, B, C, D, and E, or 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it might be it's shooting bank, I think it's called. So if you've got shooting bank A for street, and then you go inside and you change your settings, and then you go to shooting bank B, when you go back to shooting bank A, it will be where you last left your settings.
Right.
Whereas with the U settings on the other cameras, they just default.
Okay.
So this is Chris's camera, which is the Sony a7 IV. So the person that wrote in, that's the camera that they've got. And this has the various 1, 2, 3 on the shooting dial here. So you can bank your settings, just like the Nikon. And what's interesting about the Sony camera is you also internally have, so you've got settings 1, 2, and 3, your memory banks, but you've also got some M1s, so like M4, M5, no, M1, M2, M3, M4. What this is this is memory bank saved on your SD card.
Oh, right. So I'm guessing, and tell me if I'm wrong here, so that means you can take your card out, put it in another camera, and it carries that information with it?
I don't know.
I reckon that must be what it does. If it is, that's super clever.
Yeah. So the thing is, or if you just run out, you've got your 3 memory banks.
Yeah.
you can do that. But yeah, no, you're right. The problem is with that, though, is if you format the card, then you're going to lose it.
Right.
And to find it, you have to go into the menu system. So it's not on a dial anywhere.
Gotcha.
And you need to have, if you're in manual mode, the M mode, or shutter priority, aperture priority, auto, you won't be able to access them. You have to already be in one of your shooting modes to be able to access it, which is cool. And then, of course, you can customize all of the different buttons. So we've got C1, C3, and C2 custom buttons, but you can also customize things like the wheel here,
the spinny ring,
which is like on Canon cameras.
Yeah.
So again, just like the Nikon, you can go through and customize the whole camera. And of course, you can also customize your lenses.
Oh, yes. Function buttons.
Exactly. Or if they've got a control ring. So here's a lens with a function button.
So here's a lens with some... So this has got loads. Most lenses don't have this many, but there is a load of function buttons. So obviously they're at your hand's reach. So those can be customized the same as your camera buttons can.
You might put a focus limiter on with a lens. So you might say that if you're shooting a certain subject at a certain distance away, you might say, I know you're shooting with a 200mm lens and you don't want it to focus beyond 100mm or something to make your life easier. And yeah, control rings as well. You can set a control ring to... control aperture, for example, which is great. So yeah, there you go. And with the Sony camera, the only thing to look out for, which I found myself, is when you are assigning custom buttons, some of the settings are they have an icon by them. So it might be like camera icon, little play button icon, or video camera icon. And obviously, as you've already guessed, these relate specifically to video functions, playback functions, but then there's something that you can miss. If you're doing it for the first time, you might not sort of notice them. So do make sure that you pay attention to that. And yeah, really, you can go online, find a YouTube video or something with somebody showing you how to do this.
For your specific model.
Consult your manual. The other thing is just do it at home. This isn't something that you want to do out on a shoot. Don't leave it till you're out on your shoot. It's not complicated, but it's a bit convoluted. You really want to be sat on the sofa with a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Go through your camera, no pressure, look through all of the settings, because I can't tell you how to set up your camera because it's completely personal. Go through all of the settings one by one, research what they do, and find out which ones that you want to make use of, and then you can assign them to a button. The other thing is, and I think I've said this before, but if you get a new camera, I actually think it's worth just throwing yourself into it and customizing the buttons almost immediately. Because if you've got a new system, I'm talking more a new system than anything, you've got to kind of learn the camera anyway. So you might as well set your custom buttons and learn those.
As you're learning the new system.
Yeah. Instead of having to learn the new system, then you swap everything around and you're starting from year dot again.
So I've got thoughts on that. I've got two thoughts. So let's try and remember the second thought I was going to have. Because I primarily use OM system cameras, which have a lot of custom functions, and there's a toggle switch. So let's say you've got 10 custom buttons. You flip the toggle switch, those can all do different things. So you get 20 custom buttons. So when I first got my very first, it was an Olympus camera back then, I sat down and I went through, like, I'm going to assign this to this, and I'll put that on that, and I'll put that on that. I was basically finding things to assign to the buttons without ever really having used the camera. And it turns out I didn't need to do any of that because I didn't use any of those features. What I found more useful for me personally was to use the camera for a bit, work out, in this situation, I wish I had that as a hotkey or a shortcut. And then I'd go home and add that to my arsenal. So it was almost like as I found I needed them, for me personally, then I would go and add those as custom functions rather than trying to remember, I did burst mode on this and changing the screen brightness on this, but I can't remember which is which. So for my brain, because I'm easily confused, I'm a simple man, I add them as I need them.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that's a good idea. I think probably if you're a seasoned photographer and you know how you work, you know what functions you use, but you are swapping systems, then probably just go for it, change your custom buttons, and then live with it. But that is a good point. And also, I wouldn't suggest changing your custom functions and then going out and doing a wedding the next day.
No, sir.
Yeah,
not if you want pictures that do what you think they're going to do. The second thing I was going to say is, so let's say you've got two cameras. Say you're really lucky you've got two Hasselblad bodies, because a lot of folks do have two cameras, usually from the same brand, especially if you shoot weddings or anything, and you've got big lens on one, little lens on the other. Make sure you marry those custom settings amongst both cameras, because otherwise you'll be shooting this, then you'll switch the other camera, and if the custom functions are different, you might get completely lost, you might miss shots, you might miss your client shots. So if you are going to that effort and you do have two bodies and they are the same system, my advice would be to make sure that you're mapping the same functions across.
Yeah, I agree. And also, most photographers, a lot of photographers already use custom functions without even knowing it, because one of the most popular things you can do to customize your camera is to set it up for back button focus,
right?
Which is essentially a custom function.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're on the fence about custom functions and you are a back button focus user, then I think that is a great kind of poster boy for setting up your camera and fiddling around with the custom functions, because my life before back button focus was very different to my life after, and I've never gone back. It seemed weird, alien at first, but it changed my photography. And I think a good custom button setup has the power to change yours.
Definitely. I will add my tuppence to that, which is someone who primarily shoots portraits. For me, the most helpful thing is to have a quick way to adjust something as simple as indoor exposure to outdoor exposure. If you're a wedding photographer, you'll know the pain of that. You're shooting. As you walk out of the church, the light changes, and then you can do it. You react and you change all your settings. Sometimes you don't react in time, and then as you're going outside, all your stuff's overexposed. Or you're doing the other way, you go inside and the stuff is underexposed. So just being able to quickly switch between indoor settings, ISO nice and low, blah, 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 outdoor settings, whatever. It's just a really helpful workflow thing. And as you say, once you get used to it, it's a pain to set up. Once you get used to it, you'll probably never go back.
Yeah, and failing that, aperture priority and auto ISO. Job's done.
Black and white, put a vignette on it.
Exactly.
So that is how to, or why you might want to customize your buttons. Give it a try. You don't have to stick with it. You can always change it back. Press factory reset. Pretend it never happened.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
If it doesn't work for you, don't tell anyone you ever did it. If there's anything that you would like us to troubleshoot for you, please do leave us a comment down below. Send us an email, like our good reader here. Don't forget to, while you're at it, smash the like button, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Michael, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, James.
Thank you all for watching, and make sure that you F8 and be there for our next episode of Bokehface. Bye-bye.